Okay, so we mentioned the fault of having the hips too low. The next one here is having the hips too high. This is probably less of a significant fault in the sense that you can still perform some good posterior chain work from this position. And in fact, this would be a pretty ideal Romanian deadlift stance. We can hammer the hamstrings, the glutes, the low back from here, and really light up that posterior chain really well. But if we're trying to deadlift for maximal strength or increase the weight on the bar, for specifically the deadlift, getting the quadriceps involved a little bit more here by having some more knee flexion is going to be desired. So here's what we see here is just pulling from this position of having really pretty minimal knee bend. And if the client or athlete has the ability to get into this position or even having the knees more extended or straighter without having lumbar flexion, we don't want to see any flexion of the spine. We'll get into some of the specifics in another video here soon with spinal faults. But assuming they can get into this position, certainly some benefit to be had, but this is not going to result in maximal weight pulled. So just be aware of that. Dr. Garrett, thoughts here?
Yeah, I got nothing to add. It's pretty straightforward. Just, lower the hips a little bit, bend the knees just a bit. But remember that, and this is something, because if I'm being honest, this is more of like my setup for the deadlift. My RDL and deadlift are pretty dang close. But here's something that I want to make sure students understand, or those watching understand, is that bending the knees does not mean that the knees have to go forward. So we could still maintain a vertical shin and bend the knee to lower the hips down a little bit. So keep that in mind. When you're watching your athlete, make sure that they're not bending the knee by pushing them forward, that they're just simply flexing at the knee and resting or setting the hips down. Because technically, you could bend at the knee, but if there's too much dorsiflexion taking place and that's overriding the knee flexion, the hips aren't really going to lower that much and your shoulders are still going to be in front of the bar. And that's kind of what I'm seeing most here as far as problematic is that the shoulders are just way too far over the bar. So by the time you go to pull, you'll actually see your kind of the lumbar region of your spine. You'll see it kind of go erect a little bit. Yep. And then the shoulders kind of pull back a little bit, still in front of the bar. But at least the default is trying to get it to where the armpits are over the bar there. But bend the knee, but make sure that the knees aren't pushing forward, that the knees are just flexing.
Right. Yep. And that will cause you to have to sit back a little bit at times in order to get the hips, or in order to get the knees to flex a little bit without driving the knees forward or driving the shin forward, I should say. You do have to sit back a little bit. So if you're in this position here and you want a little bit more knee flex and your weight is on the toes, you've got plenty of room to sit back a little further and get a little bit more knee flexion. You can look at, certainly there's examples of people squatting with a vertical shin and they're sitting back further than you would say with an Olympic squat or something like that. So just be aware of the kind of biomechanical relationships there between the different joints that are involved. Again, not a huge error here, not a huge issue. We can certainly get plenty of benefit out of hitting that posterior chain from this position. What we wouldn't want to see is a perfectly locked out knee or a fully extended knee. That would be certainly more of an error that we would be more worried about. But something to be concerned with, or at least pay attention to here with the setup.
Yeah, and you probably will see this with some of your taller athletes. I know myself, I'm 6'4" and I'm all legs, and I see this set up with a lot of basketball players. It tends to be a little bit higher, especially if there's limitations with hamstring flexibility and kind of hips and ankle. This one for me, it is definitely not the ideal setup, but again, as you mentioned, if this is how the person's pulling, it's not the end of the world for me. I think we will start to see some breakdown, though, for sure, when the weight and the load gets too heavy, but that's to be expected anyways.
Yep.
But if this was worst case scenario, I'm okay with this.
Yep, agreed. Okay, we'll jump into some of the spinal faults and fixes next.